My name is Cat Oriel with Forbes Breaking News. Today I'm here with Morehouse College President, Mr. David Thomas. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, so right off the bat, I wanted to start because you've been so vocal in your support of Harvard President Claudine Gays after her testimony before Congress about anti-Semitism on college campuses and in higher education. So could you talk to me a little bit about why it was so important for you to stand in support of President Gay?
Okay. So just to clarify, it was not so much a sort of blanket endorsement of President Gay, but more what I saw happening was the legitimate concerns about anti-Semitism somehow morphing into a question about her qualifications to be president of Harvard University. And that if we allow that to continue, it would essentially give voice to those who, whenever they see someone who's not white and male assume positions of authority of elite institutions, instantly the question becomes, are they qualified? I thought questioning anti-Semitism on campuses of places like Harvard, where I taught for 22 years, it's quite legitimate. It was what I referred to as the dog whistle that was being blown, that somehow the question becomes, is Claudine Gay qualified to be president of Harvard University? That I felt compelled to call that out. I thought it was quite legitimate for someone to question whether, she had made the right choices in this moment, but not legitimate to question her qualifications.
And just addressing some of the backlash that she's received about her qualifications, could you tell me a little bit about, have you met her? Do you know her personally? And what do you feel like makes her qualified? Just to respond to those people who have any doubts about her qualifications.
Certainly happy to address that. I have met her. I was a senior faculty member when she was hired and came to Harvard. I was on the faculty at the Harvard Business School. And a senior associate dean, very senior in that environment. She was highly recruited. She also has moved through the ranks of Harvard, with her last position being the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, which is the largest faculty at Harvard University. It's also the most complex. She had proved herself as an administrator, a fundraiser, and had the rare distinction of being both respected and liked, quite frankly, by that faculty, which I know for a fact can be a very difficult group to manage. She also has shown vision, when you look at her qualifications as a scholar, she's at the top of her profession. So there's no question that she is as qualified as any president Harvard has ever had.
I know she does get a little bit of backlash. I've heard that she has gotten a little bit of backlash for her lack of, published work. Is that a criticism that you also hear when people talk about her lack of qualifications, the fact that she, I believe, doesn't have a book published?
Yeah, that's a red herring. In her field, journal articles are the coin of the realm, not books.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, in my view, Either, someone who's trying to go at her qualifications who doesn't understand the field, but who has a personal vendetta
Mm-hmm.
against her, basically making something up
Mm-hmm.
that essentially doesn't matter in terms of judging her scholarly
Mm-hmm.
qualifications. And I can tell you that you don't get brought to Harvard as a tenured full professor if you haven't met the highest standards of publication in your field.
Mm-hmm.
And she was recruited from Stanford without a book because books are not the coin of the realm in her field, unlike, say, history or English.
Okay. Switching gears from her qualifications to you said it is justified to have a more nuanced conversation about the testimony itself. I'm just curious, watching back the college presidents who were testifying before Congress, including Professor or President Gay, what do you think you would have done differently if you were in their seats?
It's a great question. First of all, I would have heard the question about genocide and made it personal
Mm.
and heard it through the lens of, if someone said lynch the blacks, would that violate, right, whatever our policies are around harassment, uh, speech, etc.? And my answer would have been yes. Right? If I had been asked that question by Representative Stefanik, I would have said yes. The next round of conversation might have gone in the direction of her saying that the congresswoman, well, someone said that on your campus, what did you do about it? I likely would have then said, I've not been aware of that exact statement being made, which I actually don't think was made at Harvard, but I will have my staff look into it. And if it is the case, we will investigate it. And if it is made by a student, we will bring appropriate sanctions. End of conversation. That statement, however, has not been proven to have been made at Harvard by a Harvard student.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm curious if these are actual conversations that you've been having as a president of a college campus yourself. So how has the sentiment been at Morehouse? And, beyond just what happened on October 7th and the recent events, how have you as a leader dealt with conflict and controversies on your campus, or in this particular instance, if you have an example?
Well, first of all, sensitive issues. I think one of the hallmarks of Morehouse College, if you know anything about our school, we are a historically Black college and university. We are also the institution that educated Martin Luther King, and where he gained much of his perspective about nonviolence. Um, a major theme of our education here is leadership, service, and the search for global peace. And we have had debates in our community about what's going on in Palestine and Israel and the Gaza Strip and Hamas. It's been very civil, very respectful. We have Jewish students. We also have Muslim students. People have views, but no one has demonized anyone. So relative to what's gone on at many of the institutions like Penn, Harvard, MIT, Columbia, we've been relatively peaceful and very respectful. But I think it's anchored in our history of being able to have conversations about difficult issues um, that, predates this moment. So it's part of the culture here.
Well,
And to have bigger.
what have you been telling other college presidents if they've come to you for advice, or what would you tell them if they don't have that same sort of rooted culture and being able to have difficult conversations?
Yeah,
What could you do as a leader to help that?
yeah. Only one college president has actually come to me for advice. Um, who has been in this moment. And my advice to them has been a couple of things. And I think you can look at some of the choices, for example, made by President McGill at Penn and see where my advice would have gone in a different direction. One, don't be afraid to meet with your opposition. Because part of what we have to do in this moment is humanize each other. And I think it makes a difference if, someone who's on the other side of an issue with me sits down and we talk together so that we no longer simply become objects to each other who represent different sides of an issue, but we become human beings who may experience an issue differently, or human beings who may agree on the crux of the issue, but disagree on how we approach it. So I think that, the worst mistake a president can make is to sort of wall themselves off from the voices that are being critical. Even if it means at times walking into situations that may start out with you being booed or with people, yelling at you. But the fact that you're willing to engage people, I think, just brings to people's consciousness that you're a human being who cares about the issues as much as they do. You just may be on a different side of it. One. Two, is these moments really do test the practicality of the policies that we have in place. So each of these schools had policies about harassment and conduct, but the fact that none of the presidents could unequivocally answer the question about if someone, called for the genocide of a particular group, would that be in violation of your policy? That means that the policies may not have had a practical relevance when really tested. And we've got to look at that so that we can say to people where the line is. And the answer can't always be, it depends on the context. That basically means we don't have an answer. Right? And that's important because it also allows us to be fair to our students. Right? If our policy is very clear and says a statement that calls for violence against another group or individual violates our standards for free speech and conduct, then if that student throws that bomb and says, let's lynch the blacks, or let's, genocide against the Jews, when that student is brought up for conduct, it's very clear that that was not free speech. That was an incitement of violence against a group. And these policies that many schools have created, actually, from a practical standpoint, what's in bounds and what's out of bounds, it's pretty hard to know. and it becomes more complicated in this world of social media, right?
Yeah, how so?
Uh, yeah.
How so with the social media aspect that you think that complicates things?
Well, social media is all about language. So, when I'm on social media and I'm saying things like, you know, lynch the blacks or genocide the Jews, um, I'm using social media at the height of its ability to incite violence. But it's about speech. I'm not, physically attacking a person who is a member of a group. So by legal standards, I am not committing a hate crime. But by the standards of my institution of higher education, my college, my university, am I committing a crime or an act that violates, the standards of acceptable community conduct? I should know that.
Yeah.
So that when sanctions are brought against me, they're not arbitrary.
Yeah, no, I feel like we could talk all day about, this topic of free speech on campus, but in our last few minutes together, I did want to touch on another policy that affects college campuses, affirmative action, the ruling that got struck down. The Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in a ruling earlier this year. So, how does something like that affect an HBCU like Morehouse?
Our applications are surging.
Well, why do you think that so many students are wanting to go to an HBCU after that ruling?
For a couple of reasons. One, I think we're entering a period where Black students who are high performing and their parents no longer simply assume that being at a predominantly white institution is better than being at a historically Black college and university. Especially if my child, who has done very well in high school, excel, is now gonna, have their qualifications questioned. I went to Yale in 1974. I arrived there. My entire class had 74 Black students. The campus at that point in time had less than 250. Do I want to send my young person who's very talented to a place where they're going to be a unicorn? And if we look at what happened in California, right, when they voted away affirmative action in college admissions, places like the University of California at Berkeley saw a 70% drop in African American students on campus. Today, I think in part because of what happened there, California represents the largest group of applicants at Morehouse College, and that's been the case for more than a decade. So I think it's sending Black families to look for alternatives. And if you look at places like Morehouse, Spelman, Howard, we're the largest producer of Black men who go on to get PhDs. We're the largest feeder of Black men to the top 10 law schools and business schools. So if you come to Morehouse, you can go anywhere that you can go from Harvard. are from Yale.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think we're seeing the surge.
Yeah, so do you feel like policymakers are sincere in their discussions when it comes to underfunding and HBCUs and the issue that you are facing in terms of lack of funding? Or do you feel like there has been some progress? And if not, what gaps can be done? How can you fill the gaps given the increase of applicants?
Great question. I think that the policymakers that are taking up the issue are serious about it. The challenge is that they are a minority among those who will make those decisions. And the data is very clear. In particular, when you look at historically Black colleges and universities that are state schools, that in places like Maryland, Alabama, Georgia, over the last 50 years, the underfunding amounts to billions of dollars. I have not in Georgia seen a movement in the Georgia legislature to correct that underfunding, right? And disproportionately begin to resource those schools to bring them to where they need. And indeed, a number of them are suffering from that underfunding today, and there's no serious effort to address it. So I think among policymakers at the Department of Education, the answer is yes. I think they're sincere. Within legislatures in these states where the underfunding has happened, which are southern states where 90% of historically Black colleges and universities reside, there's no serious movement.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you so much. I hope to have a conversation more at length about all of these topics with you again soon.
All right. Thank you very much. Take care.